Welcome to the Sioux City Public Museum's History at High Noon presentation. Mary Treglia in the Community House, being presented in March of 2021 in honor of Women's History Month. And did you know that today is International Women's Day? My name is Grace Linden, and I am retired Curator of History from the Sioux City Public Museum. This presentation will highlight the life of the second director of the Sioux City Community House, Mary Treglia, as well as the early history of settlement houses around the world, as well as the history of the Sioux City Community House. The presentation will show photographs from the Sioux City Public Museum's Research Center. Credit is given to Georgia Schieffer, Haley Aguirre, and Suzanne O'Day Schenken for their written works. Throughout this presentation, there will be images of Treglia, which will have a red star, you can see that on the slide, surrounding her face so you can find her easily without me forgetting to tell you. By definition, settlement houses, also called neighborhood houses or in Sioux City, the community house, are institutions in inner city areas providing educational, recreational, and other social services to the community. Their goals are to bring rich and poor of society together in both physical proximity and social interconnectedness. Early settlement houses. Toynbee Hall was established in London in 1884 as a residence hall for college students so they could work with impoverished working class people near the college in order for the students to learn about conditions of the working class and to help improve the working class's social and economic lives. Hull House, established in Chicago in 1889, was one of the first settlement houses in North America and was founded by Jane Addams and Ellen Starr. They had programs for both social, educational, and artistic development for immigrants. The beginning of settlement houses in the United States. According to an article about the history of social work in the United States, settlement houses were started to correct social ills in the community, like the university settlement shown here in New York City. It was believed that in order to correct the social ills, help should come from within the neighborhood and directed by local leaders. The leaders and workers at settlement houses were not dispensing charity, but working with the neighborhood people in educating them and advocating for them. Underlying all the settlement house services was a philosophy of upward mobility, helping immigrants and the poor become part of the American dream. This cause had an added benefit to those local leaders, mostly women, who may never have reached their potential without the settlement houses. One of those women was Mary Treglia of Sioux City. Mary Treglia's early life. Mary was born in Sioux City on October 7, 1897. Her parents were Antonio and Rose Treglia. They immigrated here from Italy in the 1880s and had a fruit stand at 4th and Pierce Streets. Antonio died when Mary was 22 months old, so Rose began a small confectionery and fruit shop to help provide money for the two of them. Rose also sold her specialty of boiled hams as well as home canned food. Rose and Mary lived in the Leeds area of Sioux City later on, and Mary attended Central High School. In 1919, they moved to California for Rose's health. In California, Mary toured with the Bloomer Girls, it's a baseball team, and she even had small extra roles in Hollywood movies. She fondly remembered meeting a movie legend, Rudolph Valentino. After returning to Sioux City in 1920, Mary attended Morningside College and graduated with an A.B. degree from there. She went on to New York City and to the University of Minnesota to gain extra knowledge in social work. Always returning to Sioux City to be near her mother and her roots, Mary became engrossed in the social service needs of Sioux City. In 1922, Mary started working for Dorothy Anderson, the first director of the community house. After Anderson left the community house in 1925, Treglia, age 28, became director, a position she held for 34 years. Mary Treglia and her mother Rose traveled throughout the United States together. Here they are shown at the Christopher Columbus Memorial in Iowa after it was first installed on the grounds of the Iowa State Capitol in 1938. As we will see, Mary's roots in Italy played an important part in her life. The Sioux City Community House. The need for a settlement house in Sioux City. The influx of immigrants in the early 20th century overwhelmed existing agencies in Sioux City that had always helped immigrants. The Sioux City YMCA could help somewhat with the needs of immigrants, but the YMCA workers knew that they needed another organization. Their board and staff suggested a place similar to Toynbee Hall in England or Hull House in Chicago to help the immigrants. The new agency would be called the Sioux City Community House. The Sioux City Community House founding. The founders of the Community House, members of the YMCA board, paid the first executive secretary, Dorothy Anderson, and a nurse, Miss McKenzie. All other helpers were volunteers. Opening day was April 7, 1921, and the activities were executed in shifts to allow all the people who came a chance to go through the building. Why establish the community house in the East and South Bottoms? The East Bottoms in the Floyd River Valley, you can see in the red circled area on the screen, and the South Bottoms near the Missouri River and stockyards in Sioux City in the blue circled area were the areas to which immigrants migrated. Why? Because there was affordable housing and the area was close to jobs in railroad yards, stockyards, packing houses, and grain elevators, which meant that workers could easily get to work. The building first used as a community house was between these two neighborhoods, along East 4th Street. The building was not new, but it was a start. The first building, you can see outlined in red, used as a community house was near 4th and Lafayette Streets. But since the Floyd River was rechanneled, that area today would be in the river. The community house was first housed on the second floor of the Edwards and Brown Lumberyards office building at 1604 East 4th. Shelves and books were donated to start a library. The volunteers also found furniture to make the community house seem more home-like. Money for the operations was donated by public fund raising. Shortly after opening day, the city of Sioux City put the community house in the community chest in order to receive funds for operations in the future. The immigrants. Here are just some of the immigrant groups in Sioux City who were helped by the community house. The list is there, but I will go through it. African American, Armenian, Bohemian, Bulgarian, Chinese, Danish, French, German, Greek, Italian, Jewish, Lithuanian, Mexican, Norwegian, Persian, Polish, Romanian, Russian, and Spanish, and anyone requesting help. Americanization was one of the main reasons for the establishment of the community house in Sioux City. Classes were organized for immigrants to take their citizenship exams. Classes were held at night for working men and women, during the day for the unemployed, housewives, and students. Articles of incorporation for the community house state, the object of the community house is Americanization. This shall be accomplished by promoting the spirit of patriotism and by developing the spiritual, social, and intellectual life of foreign-born people. Early activities at the community house. Activities at the community house were started to bring in people of all ages and to teach them new skills, such as these in sewing and art, Boxing and basketball were two sports played by the young people at the community house. Youth activities were numerous, especially daycare and after-school groups. In the upper right photo is Stella Sanford, seated on the left, who played an important role at the community house and later in starting the Sanford Community Center in Sioux City. These photos show Mary Treglia as she participated in activities of adults and young people in the Bottoms area of Sioux City. Other groups were formed at the community house, such as Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, Italian Club, Women of All Nations, Alpha Sigma, the Industrial and Business Women Club, Men's Club, and a Business Girls Club. Of course, holidays were emphasized, teaching immigrants about American culture. The Women of All Nations Club. In the 1920s, Dorothy Anderson and her new worker, Mary Treglia, went door to door in the Bottoms area of Sioux City to recruit women for the new Women of All Nations Club. Treglia's mother, Rose, was an early member. Women who could not even communicate in the same language found out they had similar problems. They established a daycare, etiquette classes, and even had a drama club. One community worker reported that women exchanged recipes, listened to good music, laughed, and developed a spirit of courage. National meetings. Treglia attended many national meetings to further her knowledge of social services. The 4 women shown in this article from Sioux City attended the National Federation of Settlements and Neighborhood Centers in Milwaukee. Treglia directed the national meeting in Milwaukee, the first person from a small city to do so. Attending from Sioux City, in the picture, Elzona Trosper, Jane Yates, who later was a director at the community house, and Daphne Mayorga, a student worker at the community house. Treglia enjoyed many women's group activities in Sioux City, and there are many photographs of Mary Treglia and these groups. As seen in these articles, Treglia was always making news. In the article on the left, she was elected head of the local social workers club in 1936. In the middle article, it was reported that she gave a speech on leadership of tomorrow at Morningside College, which honored women holding offices in student organizations. And in the third article, she was named the Sioux City Woman of Achievement in 1952. Of course, presenting the award was Dawn Stone, the KSCJ radio announcer at the time. The National Italian-American Civic League. Treglia and her mother, Rose, were big supporters of an organization which began in the 1920s, the National Italian-American Civic League. In 1934, Treglia became vice president of the National League at a meeting in Chicago. The article on the left talks about that. She was 37 years old at the time and the only woman to hold an important national office in that organization. The League's president at the time praised her work with the Italians in Sioux City, Iowa. She was also a member of the local chapter of the League's auxiliary and became their president. See the article on the right. Treglia, seen seated in the center here, was involved in many group activities. I think this could be a meeting or a dinner with the members of the Italian Club. A new community house building. By 1931, the community house had outgrown its few rooms on East 4th. Then, the East 4th building had a fire and was condemned. Only $750 had been set aside for a new building. Someday. That day had come, despite being in the middle of the Great Depression. Lincoln School closed at 6th and Morgan, near 6th Street and the Floyd River Channel today, and the city gave the community house the land so they could construct a new building. Milton Perry Smith, head of the Department of Parks, promised the community house county relief labor if the community house could afford the building materials. In February 1933, the ground was broken. The following day, the bank that had the $750 closed, but the dream lived on. First of all, where the second community house was located. It was built in 1934 at the southwest corner of 6th and Morgan, and that's in the green circle. Today, this is an empty lot next to the Floyd River Channel. Across the street and to the east is the Ideal Wheels car lot today. Paying for a new building. A Buy a Brick campaign helped bring in funds for the new building, whose total cost ended up to be about $4,000, as so many materials, furnishings, and labor were donated, such as architectural pieces from old homes around Sioux City that were being razed. The donated pieces helped supply woodwork, doors, iron stair railings, fireplace fixtures, and so on. City inspectors, electricians, and the city architects' wages were donated. The community house staff moved in the new building in the spring of 1934, even though the building was not finished. The work continues. The community house continued to help immigrants, the poor, and the disadvantaged in many ways. The workers helped the disadvantaged find employment during strikes and depressions. They helped feed a family on low income wages or during strikes. They helped combat problems of teenage angst as well as people having marital problems. In the 1936 fiscal year, the community house helped 42,000 people. By 1942, the number had risen to 70,000. Treglia was aided in her work by many staff members. This photo has 1953 written on it and was probably taken at her office desk at the community house. Treglia was part of an event held at the KVTV television studios, later KCAU. Along with her were Stella and Art Sanford, who started the Sanford Community Center in Sioux City. Floods and urban renewal. Even though the community house received floodwaters during the many Floyd River floods in the early 1900s, the community house workers came together to help others by distributing clothes and food, as well as inoculating people for typhoid fever. After floodwaters went down, the Red Cross used the community house building to help distribute chloride of lime or bleach. After the flood of 1934, the city, the community house, and the Works Progress Administration began talking about urban renewal. However, it took more time and more floods that damaged the homes and businesses even more in the Floyd River Valley before urban renewal plan came into existence. When urban renewal projects began, homes in the bottoms were tagged and later demolished, moving people out of the Floyd River Valley to the far east, west, and north sides of town, making room for industry and retail. It was finally finished in 1969 and was named in honor of Mary Treglia. For example, after renewal, 6th Street became known for automobile dealerships, where once there had been many East Bottom homes. Mary Treglia's thoughts on settlement houses. Mary Treglia, as other settlement house workers, saw the broad scope of settlement house work. She wrote the Sioux City Community House gives, quote, comfort and understanding to persons who have lost security and hope. It gives outlet to the idle youth and chances of expression to those who are gifted but unnoticed. It offers refuge from humdrum existence. It provides contacts between those who are in favorable social and financial circumstances and those who are struggling against physical privation and lost spiritual morale. It is the one place that the unemployed who seek physical maintenance and the emotionally perplexed who need peace of mind can go and feel that their interviewer has a sincere and sympathetic interest in the solution of their problems. Tributes from city, county, and state. These tribute letters and many others were sent to Mary Treglia in 1956 for her 35 years of service to the community house. The letters came from people and agencies with whom she worked. Here are just a few. Starting on the left, the American Cancer Society Woodbury County Chapter. In the middle, the Boy Scouts of America, Sergeant Floyd Area Council. And on the right, the Wall Street Mission. Here are more tribute letters. On the left, the YWCA. In the middle, the Community Chest of Sioux City. And on the right, the Community House, which had just been renamed in her honor, although the stationery does not show that change. The staff and board sent Treglia a letter saluting their boss as the best there is. Those signing that letter were Alva Tolf, Associate Director, Jane Yates, Program Director, and Hazel Richard, Secretary. Carol Marchand of the Family Service Incorporated organization said it best: "Dear Miss Treglia, it is not often that the community pays tribute to a social worker. You are a symbol of social work. You have placed an indelible stamp on this community. You have set an all-time record of 35 years. You have gained the respect of the community as a whole and have been a spokesman for the underprivileged. You have put Sioux City on the map." Mary Treglia Funeral Services. As the headline reads, Mary Treglia died at age 62 on October 10, 1959, at her home in the Sydney Apartments on Pierce Street. To honor Treglia, the community house closed for a week. The funeral was held at the Cathedral of the Epiphany, with a Requiem High Mass read by Reverend Raymond Curvain. Her body was taken to the community house, and over 500 people paid their respects. A black women's group sang, "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen." A Russian priest and his choir chanted their funeral service at the community house. Ministers, rabbis, and priests were all honoring her from their pulpits during that week throughout Sioux City. Honoring Mary Treglia. Mary Treglia had become the second director of the community house in 1925, but it wasn't until 1956, 3 years before she died, that the community house was named in her honor. Mary Treglia Community House today. Mary Treglia did not live to see the construction of the current Treglia Community House at 900 Jennings Street. It was finished in 1963. The Mary Treglia Community House mission statement continues Treglia's legacy. We believe cultural diversity strengthens our community. We strive to identify and respond to the needs of the immigrant population in Siouxland through education, services, advocacy, and celebration of diversity. Through these efforts, Mary Treglia Community House makes possible the self-sufficiency and empowerment of the individual. Mary Treglia's legacy. Her legacy was summed up at the funeral service when a verse from St. Mark was read. "For I was hungry, and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in." Mary Treglia was a leader in the community, but her work directly with the people she served is her biggest legacy. And in her own words, the underlying principle of the true neighborhood house is human service.